Well, good morning. Good to see all of you. Thank you for being here. My name is Joe Loughlin. I'm the lead pastor here, and if I've not met you, I'd love to do that today. I'll be right out in the Commons afterwards. Come by, say hello. Some of you began to attend here while I was on sabbatical during the summer for 3 months, and so I haven't gotten to meet you yet, and maybe it is that in 3 months, maybe I might have forgotten a name or two, so who knows? But anyway, that's on me, not on you. But anyway, come by, say hello if I don't know you. That'd be great. I'd love that. And I also want to welcome those who are watching by live stream as well. Thank you so much for joining us wherever you are. Maybe you're even deployed overseas. Thank you for serving us and joining us online like some of you do. Maybe you're a college student and you're away. You haven't found a place to worship yet, so you kind of watch us on Sunday mornings from wherever you are. We're really glad that you do that. Whatever reason you've joined us online, we really appreciate it, and thank you for doing that. We really are enjoying that you have joined us online, and want to invite you to come see us sometime in person. That'd be great. It is a great month. Those in the sporting world think that October is the best month of the year for sports. And in our culture, that's probably right. I mean, Major League Baseball's wrapping up its season. The World Series is soon, and maybe your team is still in it. Mine is not, but that's okay. I still watch the games. The WNBA, Women's NBA, is entering its finals this next week. I found out something yesterday I did not know about sports. NASCAR has playoffs. Brad over here told me, I had no idea, Brad, that NASCAR has playoffs, and they're happening right now. You got all the college football, NFL, high school football, all of that. And go Crew for their win yesterday, and go Crew. And then we've got, the NBA is going to start at the end of the month, NHL. Have I forgotten your sport? Mumbly peg, anybody play mumbly peg out there? Yeah, okay. No, you're going to Google that in a minute. It involves knives. Don't go there. Okay, all right. That's a whole other thing. But anyway, it's a big month in the sports. It's also a big month for us here at First Temple because it is our 150th year this month at First Temple. And give the Lord a hand. Can we do that? 150 years? Most people don't realize that this church has been in existence that long. We only have a couple of charter members left. That's why. You'll get that in a minute. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. So on Saturday, October 26th, that's our big celebration weekend, Saturday and Sunday, but especially Saturday. It's going to start off, we've got stuff going all day long. We're going to start at 8 downtown, one of our former sites, to do prayer and communion. Then we're going to come back out here and have a parade from North Belton Middle School all the way down here, up Westfield Road, coming here to the church. Then we're going to have lunch. And you need a ticket for that lunch on Saturday, by the way. It's going to be a catered deal. We're going to be here, and you need a ticket for that. And then after that, we have a special service at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in our classic venue next door. And then afterwards, all the former pastors and ministers will be gathered together for fellowship. You'll be able to meet them or greet them. Or maybe somebody was here serving before that comes back, and you haven't seen them in a while. You'd love to come by, hug their neck, shake their hand, whatever. That's going to be that day. And then on Sunday, we'll have a regular services like usual on Sunday morning. But then there's going to be burgers and hot dogs after lunch for free. You don't need a ticket for that one. Just stay afterwards for dinner on the grounds. It's going to be wonderful. It's going to be a big weekend. We're going to celebrate very well together. This church began on November 21st, 1874. So it's not quite 150th till next month, but that's right near Thanksgiving and all of that, so we thought we would do it in October. And it started in a little schoolhouse about a mile west of downtown Temple, because Temple wasn't even in existence then. I guess if you could think about Little House on the Prairie, that's what it was like. They started in a schoolhouse, and they outgrew that, and so they built a building, and then that building in 1981 was destroyed by a tornado. Now, if you think about our history and how close we came to a tornado in May, going right here, God spared us with only really minor damage, nothing significant that you can really even see except a couple little roofs, all the portables back here. We'll get a new roof out of the deal like many of us have, even though it's not leaking or anything like that. It's damaged. But we were really very fortunate. But the church experienced great loss in 1881 when a tornado destroyed its little building that it had. And then it relocated to Temple, and I'll tell you about that story in a minute, and it built the building in 1895. It's quite a massive building. You'll see it in just a second. And that building stayed erect until 1938, and then a fire took it out. And then another building was built, and then that building burned in 2010. And many of you may have been here or were here in the community or as part of the church when that fire took place. And then we are in our 6th location as a church now, sitting here in the modern venue at 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning on West Adams. That's our 6th location as a church family. Here are some of the pictures I want you to see. This is the building that was built in 1895. Now think about that. That would be a fairly impressive building today. That was built in 1895, an incredible thing. Then that's the one that was burned down in 1938, and this building was built. And here's a color version of it, and that's the building that burned in 2010. And an arsonist burned that building in 2010. And they had a person of suspect, but they never did file a case because they could not prove that. We don't even know who that person is. The authorities never named who that person was. We do not to this day know who it was that burned the building down. But it was a total loss, as you can see. And the church relocated here 4 years to the day after the fire in this building in 2014. The church has had several names. At first it was known as Pleasant Hill Baptist Church, and then it took on Birds Creek Baptist Church. No, we don't get a discount at Bird Creek, okay? That's right. But there was a name there because part of the area was there. Is out kind of sort of where Salmon's Golf Course is now. Is kind of the area where it was. And then it became known as First Baptist Church Temple, and this is why it became known as that name. Because in 1881, 82, somewhere in there, the Santa Fe Railroad decided that it would build its track through what is now Temple, Texas. And it formed and created a little village or community called Temple, Texas. And Santa Fe Railroad decided that what they needed to do was they needed to encourage a positive influence in this new little community where it was building big railroads to come through, is to offer a piece of property to this church that was out west of the city and invite them to move down to downtown Temple. And so they did that and eventually built that building in 1895. Very impressive thing that happened. Now, what we're going to see in this month is we're going to take some very important lessons learned from our history as a church family, all the ups and downs, highs and lows, mountaintops and valleys, and attach them to lessons in the early church in the scriptures and God's people in the scriptures, and then apply them to our lives and see how it is that we can learn from those lessons of history. Because here's the thing. First Temple is a very well-established church today. You drive by on West Adams, you may not know about all the history. You may know about the fire in 2010 that took place, but maybe that's news to you as well. But you don't know about the previous fire or the tornado that took out the church in 1881. And then the high of just that same year, a few months later, the railroad offering the church a piece of property to build a building on and to have a new location. And to see all of those lessons together, how God has always been with this church. And this church has always sought to walk with God. It's a very, very important thing that we can learn from. You know, some of these lessons are for us as a church. Some of them are for us in our own personal lives as well. You and I live lives in a crazy world, and sometimes it gets very frenetic, and sometimes we just experience all kinds of highs and lows and ups and downs and mountaintops and valleys. And what we need to learn is that through all of those things, whether they're good or bad, God is still with us, and we can rely on Him and trust in Him. And we learn that from the history of our spiritual grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents who lived before us as part of First Baptist Church Temple. So many lessons to glean from. You know, sometimes we look at influencers like a guy like Ferris Bueller, you know, back in the 80s. How many of you have never seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off? Okay, your assignment is to go home and watch it today, okay? That's a very important movie, all right? Ferris Bueller said this in the 1980s, life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. And that's true for the most part, except that when you and I are really trying to get going in life, sometimes what we experience, rather than stopping and looking at life and all of that like he suggested that we do, we feel more like that we're the squirrel in the middle of a road trying to decide which way to go with big truck tires about to mash us. And so we just run around like crazy and we're not sure exactly what to do. And today what I want to do is share with you some things from the scriptures from one of the early church letters that we have in the New Testament. A guy named the Apostle Paul wrote a letter to a group of believers in Galatia. Now that's a particular area, not a particular town, but an area. and he wrote a letter to the church at Galatia. Now, it was different back then. They didn't have churches all over the place in an area or even in a town. There was just one church. So, nowadays what happens is if you go to a church and they change the music, or you don't like the music, or you don't like what they're wearing, or you don't like what they're teaching, or you don't like the preacher, or you don't like somebody else that's going there, you just find another church to go to. Back in this day, that wasn't the case. That's not how it worked. There was just one church. There was the church in Galatia in that area. And Paul wrote a letter to them. And he said two real important things I want to pass along to you today that I think our spiritual ancestors at First Baptist Church Temple demonstrated. And that's why we get to be where we are today, because of how they lived their lives. Paul said to these Galatians who had experienced all the highs and lows and ups and downs and mountaintops and valley experiences, and were experiencing them right then as one of the newer churches in this new thing called following Jesus Christ. It was a very challenging thing. This is what he said to them. Two things I want you to hear today. He says, so I say walk by the Spirit. And then he said later on in chapter 5 of Galatians, if we're going to walk by the Spirit, since we walk by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. So walk by the Spirit of God and keep in step with the Spirit of God. And you may be thinking, well, now what does that mean? How does that apply in my life? How do I do that? Well, I think those are fair questions. And what I want to do is I want to open up Galatians 5 and look at it and see if we can't find some things from this text. Galatians chapter 5, starting in verse 16. This is what Paul says. So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not any longer gratify the desires of the flesh. Now, when he's talking about the Spirit, he's talking about the Spirit of God, guiding the people of God. When he talks about the flesh, he's talking about our own selfish desires, the ways of the world, kind of like human thinking that just decide its own path. Following that, he says, I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will no longer gratify the desires of the flesh. For the flesh wants what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They are in conflict with each other, so that you are not to do whatever you want. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are no longer under the law. The acts of the flesh are obvious. The signs of someone following the flesh instead of the Spirit. The outward manifestations of living according to the ways of the world and our selfish desires, he's going to list here. The acts of the flesh are obvious. Sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, and envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. Now, when he says and the like, preachers like that. I'm glad he put that phrase in there, because whenever there's a list like that, people read through it and go, oh, didn't name mine, I must be okay. But he says, and the like. So busted we all are, okay? Yeah, and the like. He says, I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this, like he's just listed, will not inherit the kingdom of God. Instead, verse 22, but the fruit, the outward manifestation, the result of following the Spirit, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against those kinds of things, there's no law. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. If we're going to live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. If we're going to walk with the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. So I hear three things in this passage, and I want to share them with you this morning. And as I wrote them out the other day when I was preparing for this, I was shocked to realize they, in my mind, all start with the letter P. I don't normally do that. I don't use alliteration usually in my sermons, but these three things all start with the letter P. I want to talk to you about path and pace and persistence. Path and pace and persistence. Now, path is the way that we're going. And Paul here gives us two distinct paths that he compares. One is the way of the world, the way of the selfish desires that we have, and it's very distinct and real. And then there's the path of walking with the Spirit of God. And what he does in this text is remind us that these two paths are actually mutually exclusive. One desires this, and that is completely against the desires of this other one. And this one desires this, and that is completely against the desires of the other one. They are mutually exclusive. The challenge is you and I, and the Galatians, and Paul even said he fell into it sometimes too. We are all like this. We occasionally find ourselves that we are trying to keep a foot in each of the paths. And that is problematic because they do not go together. It's not possible to actually live our lives that way. One of the reasons is terrain. One of them is very flat and easy and fun. And the other one can be fun, and sometimes it's flat and sometimes it's easy, but it's also sometimes very steep and very rugged and very challenging and very difficult because the leader of that path, the Spirit of God, is up to something in our lives to do some kind of work. So you and I have to constantly ask ourselves, which path are we on? We have to pay attention to path. If we're going to walk by the Spirit, if we're going to stay in step with the Spirit, we're going to have to focus on the path that we're on and decide, now, which path am I trying to follow here? I will tell you, by and large, the history of this church is that our forefathers and mothers in the Spirit life have kept on the right path. They have focused on, through all the ups and all the downs, they have focused on following the right path, walking with the Spirit of God. Second thing I want to talk to you about in this is pace. And I think this one might be really challenging for us. That first one was kind of like, yeah, okay, we get it. We've heard that before. But I want to talk about pace with you a little bit. That's keeping in step with the Spirit. If there's anything about the pace of following Jesus that I know about, that I've learned in my life, it's this. That the pace of Jesus, the pace of the Spirit of God is often way slower than I want it to be. God just doesn't seem to be in a hurry like I think he ought to be in a hurry. Now, am I the only one that experiences this, or you got this too? Have you not ever stopped and said, Lord, let's go, keep up. I mean, come on, are y'all laughing with me or at me? I need to know right now what you're doing, okay? Yeah. Okay, yeah, no, we do that. We do that. And this is what I found. In real life, people that walk with me say, Pastor, you kind of walk slow. Because I do. I just kind of, when I'm on a regular, just kind of day-to-day kind of thing in here, I just kind of walk slow. But I found as slow as I walk, Jesus still walks slower than that. His pace is much different. And I have to regulate my pace to fit his. Here's the thing about Jesus. Jesus got everywhere he needed to go, always on time, and yet was never, ever, ever in a hurry. You and I are running around like crazy, trying to get all kinds of places and do all kinds of stuff, and we are breaking the law and speeding and cutting in and cutting out and doing all that, whether we're driving or walking or whatever we're doing, and we are late everywhere we go. We've got to learn the pace of Jesus. Have you not discovered that God doesn't move as quickly as you want him to sometimes? He's at a different pace. I have a friend that has a shirt. I need to get this shirt, I think. This shirt says, Jesus took naps, be like Jesus. I like that shirt. You and I need to slow down. I think that's actually what Ferris Bueller was saying sometimes. We just need to slow down and look around. But we need to make sure we're doing that according to Jesus' pace, not our own. Now, the third thing I want to tell you about this path, this pace, is persistence. And that is, once we discover that we're on the right path and stay on the right path, and it takes us focusing on that hourly throughout our lives, hourly, minute by minute, and we learn the pace of Jesus and we get that pace down, then we've got to be persistent. We've got to keep on keeping on. We must keep walking no matter what happens. We've got to keep walking. Persistence is key. This summer, while I was on sabbatical, I made some daily commitments that I would do every day for 92 days on my sabbatical. I just decided I would do that. And one of those things I committed to doing every day was walk at least 30 minutes. And y'all, I journaled what I walked, how long I walked, and all that. I actually walked for 87 of the 92 days. I only skipped 5. It was incredible. I developed this very serious persistence. In fact, I decided that since I finally got that kind of routine going, I would keep it going during sabbatical. And so, after sabbatical, so now I still try to walk every day at least 30 minutes. I did this crazy thing this morning and knocked out 2 miles this morning before we all gathered here at 7 o'clock for our first meeting. Now, I discovered something this morning about 5 o'clock when you walk through the neighborhoods and the Halloween stuff is out and it's still glowing. It's a little creepier at 5 in the morning than it is when you're after the sun is out. I was like, ooh, we're going to walk fast here. We're going to get to... I kind of left Jesus in the dust on that one. All right, yeah. I'm saying all that because I want you to know it takes effort to try to become persistent and get where you need to go. And here's what I want you to know. Jesus never asks of us perfection. Instead, all he ever asks is progress. That's all he ever wants from us is progress. You're way too hard on yourself because I'm way too hard on myself because we think it's about like perfection, and it's not. Jesus does not expect us to be perfect. He just wants to see progress. Now, how do we know when we're experiencing that? How do we know when we are beginning to progress and develop and we're on the path and we're kind of connecting with Jesus in the right pace and we're staying persistent? How do we know? How do we know when we're making progress? How do we know that? Well, he tells us how we know that. The fruit of the Spirit is that people around us will begin to see things in us that look and sound like this: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. You and I kind of think of those as behaviors. Gosh, if I could just be more patient. I'll ask God for patience. We know if you've ever asked God for patience, don't do that. Okay? He'll put you in situations that require what? Patience, that's right. Yeah, so don't be asking for it. Okay? What you do is you walk with Jesus on his path, at his pace, and stay persistent. And over time, what happens? Persistence begins to become part of your character. Persistence begins to be that which is seen by those around you. And I will tell you this, we're way too hard on ourselves. You know you're making progress when those around you start commenting on things like, even in the midst of this storm, you still have seemed to stay at peace. That person really cost you a lot of extra time because they didn't have their stuff together. And you, for the very first time in a long time, Joe, or you, you were patient in that situation. When those around you start seeing and identifying and even verbalizing, pay attention to that. Take that to heart. Because I really think those around us begin to see it without us seeing it because we're just too hard on ourselves. Because we're expecting perfection. And God's not. But when we see those things in our lives, we realize it's the right path and the right pace and persistence over time, progress, and therefore the fruit of the Spirit. That's what it looks like. I really believe that's why we get to be where we are today at First Baptist Church Temple, because of the path and the pace and the persistence of our brothers and sisters in Christ that have come before us in this place. A tornado that destroyed a building. 2 fires that have destroyed a building. Ups and downs, highs, lows, mountaintop experiences in the valley, and everywhere in between. Path, pace, persistence. Now, in a minute, the band's going to come up and lead us in another song. But before, they'll come on up, but before we sing that song, I want to share something with you that's tied to this that happened in my own life about 2 weeks ago. I've been trying to learn this new prayer I'm going to share with you, and this new prayer I call the with prayer. And it goes something like this. I try to sit or be still or whatever I'm doing and try to focus on the presence of God. And I don't know about you, but whenever I try to focus on the presence of God, because God is always with us, but do you ever get to the point where you just like take a little trip and forget that he was with you? Am I the only one that takes a trip? Okay, yeah, no, some of you took trips even during this sermon. Welcome back to First Temple this morning. We're glad you're here. Okay. We take trips. We forget that God's there. So what I try to do is I try to think for as long as I can about the presence of God. And then my mind wanders, and I realize my mind is wandering, and I go with. And when I say with, I invite the Spirit of God right there with me, and that I'm with him. And I just do this over and over and over. So I've tried this in my study at home. I've tried it in the prayer room here at the church. I've tried it in my office. I've tried it on my back patio. I've tried it on my front porch. I've tried it in my car waiting for an appointment that was late. Patience. And so I was with, okay? And then the other morning I decided I would try it in a real weird way. I was going on one of my walks. It was a Saturday morning, so it was a longer walk than usual. And I was going to walk for probably an hour and a half, and I decided I would walk, and I would do the with prayer while I walked. I don't ever use earbuds or anything like that when I'm walking. I want to be able to just like hear the voice of God. I don't play a radio in my car. I just keep all that away because I really want to try to connect with God during those times. And so I was walking, and I started practicing the with thing because my mind wandered, and I prayed with, and I realized the Spirit was right there with me, and I was with the Spirit, and I remembered that for a while. And about 10 minutes into the walk, something very alive happened with the word with. This had not happened in any other of the times I'd practiced this prayer. About 10 minutes into this walk, when I said with, God immediately began to flood my mind with scenes and events throughout my entire life, highs and lows, mountaintops and valley experiences, where it was very clear that God was with me. You know those times when you look back and you think, now that was a time when God was definitely with me. All those scenes and all those events began to flood back to me. I mean, just one after another, after another, after another, after another. And it went the entire walk. There were scenes and events that God brought to my mind that I had not thought about in decades. But I could see them as clearly as if they had happened just the day before. It was this incredible experience of God reminding me that he is with me and that I am with him. And that will get me through anything. It happened so vibrantly that when the walk was over with, I kind of felt sad. In fact, I even thought about kind of looping around the block one more time, but I knew Val was probably already wondering if I was okay because I was gone so long. And I decided, no, it wasn't dependent on the walk. It was depending on the with. So I could keep the with going just by praying my little with prayer. As we close this morning, I want to invite you to practice the with prayer. Would you bow your heads? Would you close your eyes? Would you do what Madison encouraged you to do earlier in the service, and that is just get in a posture of prayer before God? And I want to ask you to think about the presence of God being right there with you, because he is. And then when your mind wanders away from that to lunch or whatever, I want you to whisper with, and let your mind get right back to the reality that God is with you and you are with God. That's what I call the with prayer. For the next 60 seconds, would you just pray the with prayer, focusing on the presence of God? God, thank you for being with us, and thank you for letting us be with you. We pray in the name of Christ. Amen.